Hey guys, this is Miss Harrington, and I'm going to go over the Don Quixote Unit Assessment Study Guide that you should see in your folder this week. Now, with this study guide, the unit assessment that you are going to be taking is not going to be questions about the story Don Quixote. Rather, there are going to be questions based on the skills that we practiced and studied while we were reading Don Quixote. So on this study guide, we're going to go over the skills, the reading skills that you're going to see on the unit assessment, just to refresh your memory so that when you see questions about these skills, you're going to know exactly what to do. So what do I need to know? So the first thing that we want to remind ourselves about is how to use words and phrases in a sentence to show that we're maybe comparing two things or two characters, or to contrast two things or two characters. So you have a word list for each. So if you're writing a sentence to compare, you may use words and phrases like also, as well as, alike, both, just like, in common, similar to, and there's others as well like similarly. Now remember, when you are using these words or phrases, and that goes for both compare and contrast phrases and words, you are not always going to use them and create one sentence. You may have to use them to create two sentences to show that you are comparing and contrasting, and I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. So now let's look at our contrasting list. So you may see words like although, but, differs from, different, however, in contrast, on the other hand, than. So let me give you an example of what I meant, where you may have to use two sentences to compare and contrast. So I'm going to use the phrase on the other hand, which is to contrast. So I might say, Iron Man is an awesome Avenger, period. On the other hand, and we separate that phrase with a comma, Thor is a much stronger Avenger. So this is an example of where I may not be able to use the word or the phrase that I want in one sentence. You may have to separate it into two sentences. So just keep that in mind on the unit assessment if you're asked to write a compare and contrast sentence. So the next skill that we're going to look at is our plot pyramid, the 5 elements of plot. So when we began Don Quixote, you were given a journal entry that looked somewhat like this, looked similar to this, that went over the 5 key pieces of a plot, 5 things that every plot should have for a story to really make sense. So the first thing that we see here is the exposition, which simply is the beginning of the story. So in the beginning of the story, you should know what is the main conflict, the main problem in the story going to be, who are the main characters, and what's the setting of the story? Where is the story taking place? All of these things you should know at the very beginning of the story. So like at the beginning of our story, Don Quixote, we know that obviously Don Quixote is our main character. We know that it's set in Spain, and we also know that his conflict is he is desperately trying to become a knight. He wants to become a knight. So then from here, we go up the pyramid to our rising action. So these are important events that are going to happen before the climax. So this might be the character's attempt to solve the problem but fails. So like Don Quixote goes through all these different situations, such as attacking the mule drivers, trying to save the little boy who is getting beaten, but he fails because we talked about how he meddles, and then he ends up getting himself in trouble or getting the people that he's trying to help in even more trouble. So then we continue up to the top of the pyramid, and this is our climax. This is the turning point of the story. This is where your main character is getting that much closer to being able to solve their problem or their conflict. It's also the point of the greatest suspense or action. So the most suspenseful moment or the biggest action that takes place in the story. So from here, we start to go down the pyramid because we're getting closer to the end. So here you have your falling action. So these are action and events that occur after the climax. So this is going to be the point where your main character officially knows what needs to be done to solve their problem, and we're going to start seeing that character take steps to solve their problem or their conflict. And then the last point of our plot pyramid, this is the resolution, which is simply the end of the story where the conflict or the problems have been solved. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this because we haven't read the end of Don Quixote yet, but on Monday, you're going to read chapters 18 through 20, so you're going to know all about the resolution of Don Quixote once you're done reading. All right, another skill that you're going to see covered on this unit assessment is all about character traits. So character traits are more like words that we might use to describe a particular character's personality. So we know that character traits can be inferred because the author typically might not say, oh, this character is brave or this character is confident. So we have to infer that by looking at clues that are given about the character throughout the story. So we may look at how a character feels, things that the character says, actions, things that the character does throughout the story, and then thoughts. What are things that the character thinks throughout the story about the situations the character is involved in? So on this particular part of the study guide, you're given little boxes about particular characters, and then there's an inference about each one of their character traits. So let me just give you an example. So dialogue, when I look at what a character says. In this box, it says, this is how we're going to split the work, Daniela said sternly. I'll work on the poster while you two work on what we're going to say for the presentation. So based on the fact that she's giving orders and directions and telling people what they're going to do, we can infer that Daniela might be a little bossy. So we took things that she said and made an inference about her character traits, like her personality. And again, you can do that by the way a character feels, the actions, the things the character does, and also the thoughts of that character, what the character thinks. And then the last part on your study guide, there are going to be a couple questions that go back to a review skill that we've talked about previously, and that's making an inference. So kind of like how we inferred up here that Daniela is bossy, with an inference, the answer is not going to be written there for you in the text. So there's a few things that you have to use to come up with your best inference, which we also could say is like your best educated guess. So two things to use. So you're going to use what you read, the clues from the text, plus what you know, so any background knowledge you might have, and you take these two and you make your inference, your best educated guess. So looking at what I read, you may use quotes from the text and note pages for future reference. So quotes, things that are said throughout the text, you are going to use to help make your inference. Plus, what do I know? You may use background knowledge and prior experiences from your own life. So maybe something happens to the character in the story, but it's something that you've actually experienced, so you know a little bit about that. So you take what you read plus what you know, and you come up with your inference. You put two and two together and make a conclusion about the story. So again, when we make that inference, when we infer, we are making our best educated guess based on the clues from the text evidence, as well as what we already know.